I'd just like to say that just as God's worked in my life, He's able to work in all of our lives. And God has worked in my life, and He will work in your life, and He'll continue to work in anyone's life that comes to Him and accepts Him. Now, for myself, when I was growing up, we're all brought up in a family that loves us. Our parents try to teach us, they discipline us, they try and guide us, and bring us up with morals, and so that we can live in this world, as a good person, as a good citizen. So we could say that our family and our parents are probably one of the main influences in our life as we grow up. But I don't think that's the final authority on what influences us in our lives. I think there's also three main aspects, especially of a teenager's life, which was for myself. There's music, friends, and media. And I think that these three aspects have a major effect of how we can tend to make decisions, how we tend to make a choice, and how it influences us in what we do, what we say, what we wear, who we want to be, where we want to be, and where we want to take our steps in life. So there's great power in these three aspects. And when we start at high school, we start finding ourselves forming different groups of friends, associating with different people. In my days there was different groups. You had the surfies, you had the gothics and the grungers and the homeboys and the nerds, and so there was all these different types of groups within schools, and people. We associate ourselves with people that we feel comfortable with or we're accepted by. And I found myself with different friends in different types of groups. I went to one group and then went to this group. I also found myself at one stage with a group of friends that were listening to grunge music, heavy metal. And it was at this point, I started to smoke cigarettes, probably at the age of in year 8, year 7, year 8, 12 years old, 12, 13. So I would have, that's where my sort of rebellious years started, where I started experimenting with cigarettes, and from there I started also seeing friends, who I was hanging around with at that time, to grunge music, going out and parties, having parties, starting to take marijuana, and I also got involved with that. It was at this point in my life I started smoking and taking marijuana. It started out recreation as parties for fun. We'd have beach parties, bush parties. We'd go out to the bush and just, run amok, drink and smoke and pretty much do whatever we could because we were free. There was no parents, there was no adults, there was no rules. And amazingly, this is what the media and the world teaches today. Do what you want to do, be what you want to be. Yeah, that's what the ad says. But that's what the world teaches. We also meet lots of people during the early years of high school who really influence who we think we want to be. So it could be a certain person in high school. It could be, a particular type of group that we really look up to, and we want to be like that person. And we have a tendency, especially as teenagers, as wanting to follow other people, wanting to be, there's not many people that form their own group and everyone follows them, but most people tend to look up to someone, whether it's older, whoever it may be, a teacher, anyone. So I left school early in year 11. My parents wanted me to continue, of course, but, at some stage I didn't care, I just didn't want to be there. I said I would go out and work. So I ended up leaving school. I didn't work for about a year and a half, about a year, and then I started to work at Woolworths. And I think this was at the point where I think my parents sort of dropped their game, when they because I was working, they thought, he's being an adult now, he's more responsible, we'll let him, give him a bit more freedom. So I sort of milked it a little bit, and I took as much freedom as I could. I would lie and do whatever I can to get what I wanted and when I wanted, whether it be staying out late, whether it be, lying and saying I'm over here, or, but whatever story I could come up with. Now, it was at this point in time where I left school and I was hanging around, a few friends, and this is where I got involved and started hanging around Stockland Malls, or almost Stockland Malls. But that was like sort of a social ground during the day and even in the evenings, and it extended to night times. But I started hanging around there constantly, and it was, just meeting up, smoking, walking around, just doing whatever you could, being free, not having any parents overlook you. But I also got involved with some people from the Assyrian community, some boys from the Assyrian community, hung around them. They listened to rap music. I also liked listening to rap music, and that was a music that also influenced me in my life. It wasn't just so much the sound or the rhythm or the type of music. It was more the content which this music glorified, and it wasn't that it was just the music. It was, I looked up to what was being said in these lyrics. I wanted to be what was being said in these lyrics. I wanted to take part in all of this because it sounded so good. It was glorified so much, and it was what I liked, and it also was what I was seeing in other people around me, people I was hanging around. So that was one thing. But those aspects of that music that pretty much all familiar with what they talk about and sing about and glorify is sex, drugs, power, and gangs. Before that it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it's the same aspects, it's the same thing, and we know that these aspects are sin, disobedience to God's command. And what was it about these aspects that made me as a teenager really want them and want to chase after them or fall into them and do whatever I could to gain and hold on to those things? Well, you look at sex, obviously you've got attention and pleasure, self-pleasure. You've got drugs, it's the addiction of relying on it to escape reality. When you're a young person, you leave school, you don't know what's ahead of you, and especially when you start getting involved with people that are in that scene and you start taking drugs, it is an escape from reality. It's like being a kid, being an adult, it's just like you're escaping the real world. Feeling of being a high on top of life as well, having that power. Also with power, it's obviously having respect and authority and having people look up to you. That was one of the things that obviously was very alluring about the power that the rap music influenced myself. And also games, and that's just being accepted and belonged by other like-minded people. People that, I'd say it in a way like a false love. If people, not everyone will understand that, but if you're with a group of people that are hanging out, and they might be bad, they might do a lot of wrong things, they might, hurt people, steal, lie, cheat, do whatever, but when you're there hanging out together, it's a false sense of love, and you feel like you're being protected, you're cared for, but really you're not, because at the end of the day, nobody cares, everyone cares about themselves. But it's that false sense of love. And I experienced that of myself when I was hanging around, a certain group of people. I would, feel like I was belonged, I was part of a group, I looked up to these people. I felt, respected. These people also respected me. So it was a great sense of belonging. And that's pretty much what a gang is, or what embodies a gang and what it is. But I'll keep going on back to my story. But as I was hanging around these people, I was involved in a lot of things: taking drugs, selling drugs for personal use, for personal gain. also for working for other people to help, obviously make that money and for myself to get, extra drugs or whatever it was. That's where I was taking marijuana, it extended onto pills, cocaine, speed. There was lots of fights that happened while I was hanging around. From the age of 16, 17 till about 19. It was that period, about 16, that I was involved in all of this. And there was numerous fights, numerous brawls, people were hurt, there was, constant drug use. There was fornication, which fornication is any kind of sexual activity with the opposite sex, outside of wedlock, outside of marriage. Also, for myself, I was arrested twice for possession of drugs. Basically, during this time, I was just hanging out all hours of the night, hanging out on the streets. But the funny thing is, I had a home to go to. My parents were at home calling me, "What are you doing? Where are you? What time are you coming home?" "Yeah, I'll be home later." And it started, when I started first going out, I'd come home 7 o'clock, then 8 o'clock, then 9 o'clock, then 10 o'clock. I was like, "I'll be home later." Then it ended up getting to the point where I didn't even go home. I'd go home 2-3 days later. That's when I'd go home and I'd sleep for 24 hours or 30 hours because of the night or previous days that we had. Now, it was this, during this time, I was hanging out, on the streets, and I was there, and a man came past and actually spoke to myself and another friend. He came and started talking to us about Jesus, about, do you know who Jesus is? And for myself, I wasn't brought up in a Christian family. Most of you guys are blessed here that you know who Jesus is. But I wasn't brought up knowing that. I knew of Jesus, I've heard of, movies, cartoons, My grandmother took me to church a couple of times. My mother is a Catholic, but we never really went to church. I didn't get baptized when I was younger. And my parents made the decision that for me it was to be baptized when I'm old enough and I can make a choice. So that's how I didn't really know much of religion at all, let alone Christianity. So this man's telling me about Jesus, who he is, and realistically, I didn't really care what he had to say. It's like, yeah, whatever, all right, hurry up, leave me alone. While he was talking to me, I think we were smoking a joint at the same time too. Now, there was one thing, it's funny, I still remember, he goes, all right, one thing, I got this tape, it's of, I think Tom, some mafia confession guy. I'm like, oh yeah, mafia. So we just put it in the car, we sat there, listened to about 10 minutes, and then we switched it off. But looking back now in hindsight, I see that it was God starting to try and reach out to me in my life at that point. Time went on, another year, 6 months, I'm not too sure exactly how long. But, I felt that there was something missing in my life. My life felt empty. I had no purpose or goal in life. So I made a decision in my head. I'm like, obviously, I have to stop taking drugs. That's not doing me any good. So I made a decision that this emptiness is there because I'm having drugs. So I'm going to stop taking drugs. I made a personal effort, and I think I ended up abstaining for about 4 weeks. And then one night, I think we were organising the guys I was with were organising just to sell some drugs to some people from interstate. We went out and ended up going to a hotel room and meeting up with these people, and was there. I ended up having a lot of drugs that evening. And it was at that point where, obviously, because I hadn't had any for a while, my mind was sort of playing tricks on me. And obviously, when you're having any type of drug, but marijuana especially, and over a long period, I think it was like 5 years I was smoking for, and that was at a constant, regular use. you start being very paranoid. You think people are after you, you think people are watching your back, coppers are watching you, or this person's setting you up, or your parents don't care, or they're setting you up. So you start thinking all of these really weird, tripped out things. So anyway, we went out to this hotel room and I'd taken drugs, and we ended up leaving there. And it was at this point where I was, obviously high on drugs, and I was being given a lift home, and so there was a camera flash. And from there, straight away I started thinking, someone's taking photos of us. So I tripped out, and your mind ended up getting. But I thought someone was taking photos of me, and I was sort of organised, I was being set up. I had that, that thought and seed in my head already. And we kept going, and as we were going, the people that were driving me, they were talking like, they must have just been talking about a night out that they had, but to me it sounded like they were talking like they had been somewhere else, like they were making up an alibi about that they weren't with me. So I started, spinning up, thinking, man, these guys are trying to set me up. The guys that I'm hanging out with, they're trying to set me up because these guys are making a story up that, and they're doing it in front of me. So I started really spinning out. Now, they dropped me off at home, and as soon as I got home, it was late at night. It's probably about 2 in the morning, late at night. And I seen it looked like a common car. Straight away I thought, okay, it's an undercover police. Because I used to hold the drugs at my house. And so I thought, let's see, I'm being set up, and then there's police here. And then I looked across on the other side, and there was a car there. It could have been any car, but I thought it was a customs car, somebody that I sold to before. So I thought, that's it, I'm going to jail tonight. I got at home, I opened up, went home, went downstairs because we've got like a split level home, and my mum was downstairs, the lights were on. It was pretty strange because normally getting home at that time everyone would be asleep and it was creepy or whatever. So my mum was awake, and I sat down, and I'm waiting for her to go to bed because I had possession of some marijuana and scales and things, so I wanted to put them away. And I was waiting for my mum to go to bed because she was blocking the doorway or whatever it was that I had stashed. So she's, I'm sitting down on the lounge, she's standing there, and out of all movies they had the Scarface was shown. So I'm sitting there, waiting, and I was gone. Literally, my mind wasn't there. I wasn't thinking in a normal state. My mind was running 100 miles an hour. I had so many things going on in my mind. And this is truly where any type of drug that's a portal for Satan. I don't care what anyone says, that if anyone is taking drugs, that you're opening the door of your soul to Satan, because you can start spinning out. You see things, you hear things. It's not normal. So I'm sitting there. And my mum says, out of all things, she says, how could anyone live a life like that? And that's it. My parents have found all the drugs. I'm going to jail. They've called the cops. First I thought the people I was hanging around with said, and then I thought my parents have called the cops because they don't love me anymore because they found everything and they couldn't handle it. So, as funny as it sounds, that's the reality that was going on in my head. So I went, I can't handle it, so I tried to go to sleep, couldn't sleep, my head was just spinning. And while I'm lying there, all I hear is this voice saying, go to jail, you're going to go to jail. And then this fear started coming in my heart, if you go to jail, you're going to get names out of you. And then this voice in my head saying, go to jail, you can't go to jail, kill yourself, it's the only way out. So this was just constantly going on in my head, probably for about 20 minutes. And at this point, this is where I got out of my bed, went to go see what my mum was doing. She was still up. So that's when I went to the kitchen. I pulled out a butter knife. It was a butter knife. Went to the toaster, put the knife in the toaster. That was my first attempt to basically try and escape what I thought was actually going to happen, which was go to jail, and the fear of you know, giving up, names coming out, and the fear of that happening as well. The only way that I thought was out was to end my life that moment. So I put the knife in the toaster, and most houses now have a safety switch, so as soon as I'd done that, the power, everything went off, pitch black. My mum's gone, what's happened? And she said, go and fix it for me. So I just ignored her, and then I got in a panic, and I just went through the kitchen drawers, and I ended up going for the kitchen drawer, and I grabbed a knife. It was just not a meat, I don't know what, it was a knife, it was about that big, probably about that thick. And she actually went out to fix as she went out to fix it, that's at the point where I grabbed the knife and I stabbed myself in the chest. Now, when that happens, I screamed out. I don't know, it was like a force that came over me that, it was, whether it was fear, but it was Satan working at that point, because I was brought to a point where that was the only way out for me. And you think about it in the logical mind, it doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem like, how could you do that? How don't you think of the pain? But none of that went through my head. It was just that this is the only way out. This is the only way to get out of the circumstance I'm in. So as I did that, my mum heard my cry and she came running in. And the first thing she went to do was to grab the knife. And as she done that, her hand just stopped over the handle. Now, if she actually grabbed the knife and pulled it out, I would have died, because after I went to the surgery and went to hospital, I think I came out after 2 weeks from the intensive care for about 4 days and a week. I ended up being there 2 weeks. But the doctors, the surgeon said that the knife actually pierced my lungs, pierced the lining of my heart, and then straight between two of the main arteries. So pretty much a millimetre either way, I would have been dead. So had my mum touched that knife, I would have died. So I know that was an angel of God, or God Himself, that withheld my mother from actually touching it, because she went to, in her mind, she went to grab it, but something just stopped her. And it was at that point she was like, if I touch it, they're going to think I killed him. So that's what ran through my mum's mind, that if she touches the knife, that they're going to think that she hurt me. So she ended up not touching the knife, and she told me afterwards that there were so many times where she wanted to pull it out. And you can picture, especially for parents as well. I'm just recently a parent, but you can picture something like this happening. You can't comprehend it as a parent, to see something like that, and to experience something like that. So my mum laid me back on my bed. For me, like I said, I didn't grow up going to that church or religion or Christianity, but I tell you that night, there was a few words that I said to my mum, and I repeated them probably about 15, 20 times. Those words were, I'm going to hell, I'm going to hell. And my mum was just screaming out, what have you done? What's happened? She thought I might have killed someone, or she did not know what happened. And I hid everything from my parents very well. Sometimes parents can be very naive, as much as they love us. It's very easy as a teenager who grows up, with knowing lies and deceit. It can be easy to hide things from their parents. So I was lying there, and as I was lying there, I actually remember looking up, and I actually was seeing the knife. It was beating as my heart was beating, and each time I took a breath, I could hear the air coming out of my lung. It was piercing. I think it felt like forever that it took for the ambulance to get there. Probably would have been about 20 minutes, half an hour. During that time, like I said to my mum, I'm going to hell. And my mum herself, she wasn't really, didn't know much about it. She knew of Jesus, but she didn't follow Christ. But I don't know, that night my mum God was with her on it, because there was a lot of strength and power there. that she was able to control the situation. She was able to speak to me calmly, and I just remember her in tears, and obviously, she basically cried out and said, Lord, if you let my son live, if you let my son live, along those, please let my son live, and I'll forgive me of my sins, and just please let my son live. So, I know that God heard that, and God knows all our circumstances and situations. And to be honest, for me at that point, had that not happened, who knows where I'll be, because that actually brought me out of the circumstance and the situation I was living in, the people I was involved with, so I ended up. I was in hospital for 2 weeks, like I said. I got out, and this really, obviously, I had one of my friends, or two of my friends, one of them was just a driver, but one of my friends that showed up. And he was my closest friend out of everyone I've known for a long time. And he showed up also with another guy, but also to the local guys know what was going on, because there were like 15 cop cars at my house, there was ambulance, there was all chaos going on at my house at that time. So obviously the people I was hanging around with were curious to know whether I said anything, whether I lost their drugs, whether whatever had happened. But after I got out of the hospital, one of my friends came over, and basically, I rang up and spoke to one of my mates on the phone, and he said, "Hey, how are you? Where's the stuff?" Pretty bluntly. I was like, "Wow, that's really caring. That's that real love that I felt, as a belonging with this group, So it was at that point I realised that this was all rubbish, that I needed to get out of that. So I organised and ended up bringing up my children, giving all the drugs back that I had in possession. I think it was started to work, and God always works in the way. I had no license, so I got a job where my mum worked, and obviously that would have to settle my parents' nerves as well, because you can imagine a parent experiencing that, and then they wouldn't want to be like having a baby, and they wouldn't want to let you out of their sight. So they were obviously, a bit weary and not sure of everything that was happening. So I started work for about 9 months. Just worked, went home, saved my money, didn't go out. I had a friend of mine that a couple of times called me out to come and hang out, and it ended up bringing me back to the same group of people. So I basically decided that I didn't want to hang around with that person if they were still hanging around with that group. It's just that I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And in saying that I didn't want to be a part of it, I don't think in my heart that I could have ever said, "See, Rose, I'm not coming out, not hanging out tonight." That would not have happened. To me, it was like I got a scapegoat to get out of this, this group of hanging out with these people that I was hanging around with. So then about, I think 9 months after, or a year after I was working, I got a call from my same friend who said, come out and hang out with us, I said, who are you hanging out with? And he said, I'm not hanging out with the same guys on the while. Just with my cousins, come hang out, have a drink, catch up. So I did that, came out, and me and my friend and his cousins, and started to have a bit more of a social life with these guys, and then I was introduced at this point. Actually, before that, the amazing thing that happened was, as soon as I got out of hospital, I wasn't taught about Jesus, but I knew in my heart, the first thing I wanted to do, I went and bought a cross. I know why. I know why now, but at that time I didn't know why. I just had an urge I wanted to buy a cross, and so I bought myself a gold cross and a chain, and I kept that up on my shirt. But I bought that knowing that I had a second chance. So I realised that I had a second chance, but I didn't quite understand what I'd been saved from. I knew I'd been saved from hanging out with these guys and bad life and living in but I didn't actually understand how I was saved and who I was saved by until I started speaking with my friend and his cousins, and we were hanging out. And it was at this point that I was introduced to the message of grace. The message of grace, which grace is an amazing thing. When you hear it, you can't quite comprehend it. But it's there, and it's there in one person, and it's there in Jesus Christ. And it was at this point that I decided to make a commitment and to learn, just to understand who this Jesus is. And I remember that man that came to me as well and told me that Jesus, I was trying to reach out to him before, and then I didn't listen. Then I ended up where I was with a knife in my chest. And then I get a second chance. And then I ended up getting introduced again to people that I knew before, but then they were also starting to know and wanting to know who this Jesus is. I was like, there's obviously something going on here. I want to learn more about this. I want to know who this Jesus is. What has he done for me? Who is he? And it was at this point that I learned that grace there's love that goes upward, it's worship. Love that goes outward, it's affection, which we all know what affection is and we can show it. But it's love that stoops down, it's grace. Just as we've seen in the clips, God himself stooped down and took upon flesh to save us, to save me. Me, someone that was living in sin, who didn't care of God, didn't care about my parents, didn't care about anyone around me. I hated the world. But he stooped down and took on flesh for me. And it's for me and for you and for all of us. And this was when this was where I decided I need to follow this Christ. I want to follow him, and I want to commit my life to him because he saved me. He set me free from a life of misery, of sin. The best that the world could offer. The best of the world, all, money, drugs, whatever the world can offer that they portray as the best. It was empty, it was worthless, it was painful, it was rubbish. And God, took me out of it. And he takes all of us out of it. And that's where I continue to follow Christ. I ended up going to Bible studies and ended up participating in a church, and from there I sort of grew in my understanding of Jesus and just wanted to learn more, and then I ended up getting introduced to the church of this. It's funny that hanging around, living in sin with the Assyrian community, and ended up going to church with the Assyrian community. So go figure. I'm here, and it's amazing. I mentioned before that I was taken from a rubbish tip where we sold drugs and ended up sitting in the bishop's house, and now by God's mercy and grace, I'm a servant, a deacon for his church. But it's amazing that God can take us from a situation like that and use us for his glory. Truly, we're all unworthy. I'm unworthy. Excuse me. We all have many different circumstances and life experiences, but God works in all our lives. I just want to close off with reading this message that it's not just, okay, I'm giving my testimony here right now and telling how Christ has worked in my life. But the fact is, Christ hasn't stopped working in my life. And the fact is, Christ isn't just working in my life, He's working in all of your lives right now, because you're sitting here in His church. And if you feel that you don't have a strong enough testimony that you can't share it with someone, you can't tell someone what Jesus has done for you, you can. Because you know what? God might not have taken a knife out of your chest and given you a second chance, but God's taken you out of the eternal punishment and given you eternal life. And we're all worthy of that. Every single one of us, whether it's a lie, we've all sinned. Every single one of us, and we're all guilty of it. And we all should face that death, but Jesus took it for us. So if you feel that you don't have a powerful testimony, remember that we've all been saved from the same punishment, which is eternal death, which is the result of the sin that we're all guilty of. And that our faith is in one Lord, it's one faith, we have one baptism, it's one God and one Father of us all, who is above all and through all and in us all. So it's this same God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in us all, that reveals His amazing power to each and every single one of us individually, just as He did in my life. So your testimony is valid, just as my testimony is valid. And it's powerful because it is your personal confession to everyone around you that Jesus is working in your life. It's also your personal confession that Jesus Christ's resurrection is true. It's true because He's alive in your life today, just as He is in mine. A man once told me that, a fighter, when he wins a title, he doesn't go and retire and pack up his bags and go home once he's won the title. He stands firm and defends that title that he took hold of, so he can truly hold claim to the title that he's holding. Brothers and sisters, our title that we hold is the title of Christians, followers of Christ. We must stand firm and hold this title for all to see. Defend its truth so we can hold claim to the title of Christian when we face our Heavenly Father and He returns to judge us. And God is working in our lives. He's worked in our life and continues to work in our lives until our last breath. I thank you that I've been able to share my testimony with you. And I pray that it encourages you, and I'm sure that God will work in all of your lives as He's working in mine. Thank you.